You don't notice it at first. No one ever does. Influence isn't loud, and it isn't dramatic. It doesn't arrive like a storm. It seeps into your decisions like a temperature you slowly adapt to. You think you're choosing freely. You think your reactions belong to you. But someone somewhere has already shaped the frame you are responding within. Most people live their entire lives inside that invisible frame. Social influence is not persuasion. It's not charisma. It's not confidence or leadership. It is architecture, the psychological construction of what people feel, think, and interpret before they even open their mouths. And the truth you're not supposed to know is that emotional control always begins long before emotion appears. Machiavelli understood this centuries before psychologists gave it a name. Not as a prophet, not as a moral teacher, but as an observer of how humans bend without realizing they are bending. If you listen closely, you can almost hear him behind you now, quiet, analytical, watching how the world moves you without ever touching you. This is the first truth he would whisper. People are predictable, and what is predictable can be shaped. You see, you're not influenced by arguments. You're influenced by atmospheres, by subtle power cues, by the emotional weight of context, by how safe you feel or how uncertain, by what you fear losing or what you feel you must protect. Every leader who rises learns this before they learn strategy. Not how to talk, but how to shape what you want to believe. And if that sentence makes you uncomfortable, good. You're waking up. Because social influence is not built on dominance. It is built on psychological leverage, the tiny emotional handles hidden in every human being. Your need for belonging, your fear of embarrassment, your desire to be seen, your instinct to follow confidence, your pain when ignored, your comfort in certainty, your avoidance of conflict, your craving for approval. These forces guide you more than logic ever will. And most people walk through life unaware that these emotional levers determine 80% of their behavior. Not because they're weak, but because the mind evolved to conserve energy. Automatic responses are cheaper than conscious awareness. Machiavelli recognized this as the fundamental vulnerability of human nature. He didn't judge it. He simply saw what everyone else refused to look at. And here's the part that makes you pause. Someone who understands your emotional defaults can navigate you better than you navigate yourself. A smile becomes a weapon. Silence becomes a command. Recognition becomes a reward. Disapproval becomes a leash. You're influenced not by power, but by the suggestion of power. Not by fear, but by your anticipation of fear. Not by approval, but by the possibility of losing it. Influence is always psychological long before it becomes social. Think back to moments in your life. When you changed your tone to avoid friction. When you agreed with something you didn't fully believe. When you stayed silent because you didn't want the social cost of speaking. When someone's presence changed the way you behaved. These weren't decisions. They were responses to emotional gravity, invisible fields of influence created by context, not by logic. And here's the part Machiavelli saw that still terrifies people today. He who controls the emotional environment controls the people inside it. That's why leaders learn atmosphere before strategy. Why manipulators study your feelings before your thoughts. Why those who understand influence win long before conflict begins. You think you're reacting to events, but you're reacting to meanings someone else may have placed in your path. And if you feel a tension rising in your chest right now, that is the moment every awakening begins. The realization that you've been moved your entire life without seeing the hands that moved you. You're not powerless. You were simply unaware. In every room you walk into, social influence is already in progress. Someone sets the emotional temperature. Someone defines what is normal. Someone commands attention without speaking. Someone creates a hierarchy, even in silence. And the moment you feel compelled to adjust yourself, to shrink or expand, to speak or stay quiet, you have entered the gravitational field of someone else's influence. Most people never learn to identify it, but leaders do fast. Because influence rewards those who see it and punishes those who don't. Machiavelli would say it plainly. To understand others, first understand what moves them. To lead others, first shape what they respond to. Before you learn strategies, before you learn techniques, you must face this reality. You cannot escape social influence. You can only choose whether you are conscious of it or controlled by it. Part 1 ends where every psychological awakening begins. With the uncomfortable truth that emotional control exists, whether you believe in it or not. And once you begin to see it, you can never unsee it. You've already sensed it, that quiet shift inside you after part one. When the curtain lifts, you can't go back to seeing human behavior as random. You begin to notice patterns. The smallest reactions start to look like signals. And every social interaction feels less like chaos and more like a coded system waiting to be read. This is where the real study begins. Leaders, manipulators, strategists, they don't guess what people feel. They don't wait for clarity. They observe. They decode. They interpret the emotional logic beneath the surface. Reading people is not mystical. It's not intuitive talent. It's a discipline, the psychological equivalent of learning to see infrared light. The signals were always there. You simply never knew how to detect them. Machiavelli understood this long before his ideas were reduced to clichés. Not through manipulation, but through observation. He watched how the slightest changes in posture, tone, and social atmosphere revealed more truth than words ever could. If he stood beside you now, he'd point to the room around you and tell you this simple truth. Every person broadcasts themselves, but only a few learn to read the broadcast. So let's decode it. 1. The first layer, baseline psychology. Before you can read anyone, you must understand something crucial. People are not defined by their reactions. They are defined by deviations from their normal. You don't read the gesture. You read the shift from their usual behavior. A normally expressive person becomes quiet internal conflict. A normally quiet person becomes expressive emotional overload. A usually confident person withdraws threat detected. A usually passive person becomes assertive need for control resurfaces. The secret is simple. Identify who they are when they feel safe. Then every change from that point becomes a message. Most people never learn baseline psychology, so they misinterpret signals. Leaders, however, map baselines immediately, often within minutes. 2. The second layer, emotional levers. Every human being has emotional handles, predictable triggers that shape behavior more than reason can. These aren't weaknesses. They're patterns. The need to feel respected. The need to avoid embarrassment. The desire for approval. The fear of conflict. The hunger for control. The instinct to avoid uncertainty. The craving for recognition. When you see someone's lever, you understand their operating system. For example, a person who avoids conflict will accept unfairness just to keep the peace. A person who hates uncertainty will follow anyone who promises clarity. A person who craves validation will bend themselves to be liked. These levers run beneath words, and once you see them, influence becomes predictable. Machiavelli would call these the engines of human action. 3. The third layer, power cues. Social influence flows toward perceived power, not actual power, but signals of it. Watch carefully. In any room, who speaks first? Who interrupts without consequence? Who people look at after a joke? Who sets the emotional tone? Who others adjust their posture for? Who creates silence instead of filling it? These are power cues, tiny movements that reveal who controls the psychological space. Leaders master these cues intentionally. Manipulators exploit them. Most people perform them accidentally, unaware of their effect. The truth is simple. Social hierarchies form in seconds, long before logic has a chance to interfere. 4. The fourth layer, framing reality. This is the most advanced level, and the one leaders learn first. Framing decides what something means before anyone interprets it. He who frames first controls perception. He who controls perception controls emotion. He who controls emotion controls behavior. This is the psychology behind every form of influence. A compliment becomes a reward. A pause becomes a threat. A question becomes dominance. A refusal becomes superiority. A story becomes a belief. A pattern becomes truth. Frame the meaning, shape the reaction. This is why two people can say the same sentence, but only one is listened to. Machiavelli knew this instinctively. He understood that humans react not to reality, but to interpreted reality, the version filtered through their emotions, fears, and narratives. 5. The fifth layer, silent advantage. The most powerful influence is not what you say, it's what you withhold. Information, approval, attention, certainty, emotional expression. When you remove something people expect, you create tension. And tension is the birthplace of influence. A leader pauses, people lean in. A manipulator withholds approval, people work harder. A strategist remains silent, others fill the space with mistakes. Silence can bend behavior more forcefully than speech. And the person who understands this becomes unpredictable, which is the most powerful position in any social dynamic. 6. The final layer, unspoken awareness. Here is the truth that terrifies most people. Reading people is not about decoding them. It's about becoming immune to their influence. When you can read emotional baselines, when you see their levers, when you recognize power cues, when you understand framing, when you sense the weight of silence, human interaction becomes transparent. Machiavelli isn't your guide. He is your mirror, showing you the mechanics you've always felt but never understood. Social influence stops being a mystery. It becomes a map. And now you stand exactly where part 3 begins, at the edge between unconscious reaction and conscious awareness. The next part isn't about reading others. It's about reading yourself and seeing how influence has shaped you since childhood. The awakening begins when you realize you have been part of the code your entire life, but now you can finally read it. There comes a moment, subtle, almost weightless, when you realize something has shifted inside you. Not confidence, not power, awareness. You begin to sense the psychology beneath every interaction, like seeing the faint outline of a hidden structure behind a wall. The world hasn't changed. You have. This is the transition most people never reach, from being shaped by influence to seeing influence as it happens. And once that begins, the entire architecture of human behavior becomes visible. You start noticing the pauses people use to control the room. You see the emotional levers in their reactions. You sense when someone frames a moment to their advantage. You feel the gravitational pull of attention, status, confidence, insecurity. It's like stepping out of a fog you didn't know you were breathing in. And here's the truth Machiavelli would tell you now, with clinical calm. The one who sees the code is no longer controlled by it. Most people assume awakening is about becoming more dominant, more strategic, more ruthless. But real awakening isn't about domination. It's about freedom, psychological freedom from invisible influence and emotional freedom from unconscious reactions. So let's walk through what this awakening really looks like. 1. You stop taking things personally. At first, you lived inside the emotional gravity of others. Their tone dictated your mood. Their approval shaped your confidence. Their silence made you nervous. Their disappointment felt like a command. But when you begin to understand the code, you see something liberating. Most human behavior isn't about you at all. It's about their fears, their insecurities, their needs, their emotional levers. You see their reactions not as judgments, but as broadcasts of their internal world. A cold tone, they need control. A loud voice, they fear being ignored. A fake smile, they're protecting an image. A sarcastic comment, they feel threatened. A sudden kindness, they want something. Awakening strips away the illusion that you are the target. You're simply witnessing someone else's emotional architecture. And with that realization, 50% of manipulation loses its power instantly. 2. You recognize social atmosphere as the real battleground. Before, you reacted to words. Now, you respond to atmosphere. You notice the shift in tension when someone powerful enters a room. The moment people begin deferring to a dominant personality. The quiet discomfort under forced politeness. The status signals in posture, tone, and pacing. The unspoken hierarchy forming around you. You stop being moved by the surface and start reading the field, the invisible emotional landscape. Machiavelli would call this seeing the invisible kingdom, the psychological territory that leaders shape without ever naming it. And you begin to understand. Influence doesn't happen in conversations. It happens in the space around conversations. 3. You notice when someone is using the tools of influence. Silence, praise, tension, charm, vulnerability, urgency, ambiguity, confidence, confusion. These are not feelings, they are methods. You begin to detect when someone frames a problem to steer your interpretation, uses eye contact to assert dominance, pauses to make you chase approval, compliments strategically to lower your guard, shares a story to guide your emotional state, withholds information to increase your dependency, creates urgency to control your choices. Most people see these as personality traits. You now see them as psychological tools. Awakening gives you the ability to step outside the spell. 4. You develop an internal command center. Before, you reacted automatically. Now you have space, a buffer between stimulus and response. You ask, what is happening beneath the surface? What emotional lever are they pulling? What frame are they trying to set? What am I being guided to feel? What is the intention behind this? This is consciousness. This is the moment you stop moving unconsciously through social dynamics. And this is the moment manipulators lose their advantage over you. Machiavelli would say, "He who watches himself cannot be captured." 5. You begin influencing without forcing. Here is the most surprising part. Once you stop being controlled, you naturally begin to influence. Not through manipulation, but through clarity. Your emotional neutrality becomes power. Your calm becomes authority. Your silence becomes presence. Your awareness becomes respect. You don't dominate people. You stop being dominated by their unconscious signals. And that alone shifts the dynamic. People follow those who cannot be emotionally moved by social pressure. Not because they fear them, but because they trust the stability. This is the paradox of the awakened mind. Influence becomes effortless the moment you stop trying to control anyone. 6. The final revelation. You become the observer. You don't stand above others. You simply step outside the game they don't know they're playing. You stop living as a piece on the board and begin living as the one who can see the board. That's the real meaning of dark psychology awareness. Not paranoia, not manipulation, not cruelty. Clarity. The clarity to understand human behavior without drowning in it. The clarity to see emotional truth without reacting blindly. The clarity to walk through social environments with your mind intact. Machiavelli's shadow lingers behind this final insight. Power belongs to the one who sees the truth beneath appearance. You are no longer asleep in the system. You are awake inside it. And once you become conscious of the code, the world doesn't manipulate you the same way again. You decide what influences you. You decide what you respond to. You decide what you believe. You decide who you become. The awakening is complete. You can't unsee it now.